This is Robin Wilson, host of The Education Connection, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Each show on the network is independently owned, and the views expressed may not represent those of other podcasts. For the best education podcast, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Ben Tanzer. That's right, he's back, and he's written several novels, published a collection of short stories, as well as his essay collections. And his newest work is a memoir, and it's called After Hours, Scorsese, Grief, and the Grammar of Cinema. Oh, this is an engaging read and an awesome talk. You're going to love this. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do that, you ask? Glad you asked. Here's 3 ways. 1, tell a friend and share links. 2, go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or 2 or, to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Emmy-award winner Ben Tanzer's acclaimed work includes the novel The Missing, the short story collection UPSTATE, the science fiction novel Orphans, and the essay collections Lost in Space and Be Cool. Ben is a Story South and Pushcart nominee, a finalist for the annual National Indie Excellence and Eric Hoffer Book Awards, a winner of the Devil's Kitchen Literary Festival Nonfiction Prose Award, and a Midwest Book Award. He also received an honorable mention at the Chicago Writers Association Book Awards for traditional nonfiction and a bronze medal from the Independent Publisher Book Awards. He's written for Hemispheres, Punk Planet, Men's Health, and the Arrow, AARP's GenX newsletter. He lives in Chicago with his family. Our focus today will be his latest work, After Hours, Scorsese, Grief, and the Grammar of Cinema. Ben, thanks so much for being on the show again, and say hi to everyone.
Oh, hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me back. First off, I absolutely love talking to you, and I enjoy listening to your interviews, and I don't know if anyone prepares better than you do, so I know I have to have my A-game plus, so that's all very exciting. And anyway, I'm just honored to be back and really appreciate you reading the book. I don't know how many people have read it yet, so you're in a very select group, which if it doesn't grow, I'll still be thrilled as who's read it so far, but thank you for that as well.
Oh, you're very welcome, Ben. And your book is awesome and a cool focus you have. And I'm glad to have you back here so we can share it. And let's start with this. Your book is called After Hours, Scorsese, Grief, and the Grammar of Cinema. How would you describe the genre of this book, and who's your target audience?
I believe it is sort of grief memoir meets film commentary or film criticism. So somehow trying to merge those disparate things while recognizing I'm not an expert in grief or film criticism. So as soon as you remove my expertise, that's what I'm going for. I was thinking about this a lot, and you're great because you always send questions in advance, but I thought, who is the audience? I hope and believe it's for readers and humans that are interested in thinking about grief and creativity, first and foremost, 2 of the sort of dueling things that drive this book and drive me day to day, but also people interested in film and how someone might think about film. I had a very funny exchange with my brother who read an early draft. He said, "Do you consider this film criticism?" And I said, and I paused. He goes, "Because it's like 180 from normal film criticism. However, if this is what you were intending to do, I really like it." And I said, "Well, yes, and that's what I was intending to do." So, people who love movies, I hope, people who love Scorsese, who's sort of a icon or running through line in my life, particularly my family of birth. So again, I was thinking, if you dig grief, memoir, creativity, movies, hopefully this is your jam.
Very cool, very cool, and it fits well in all in those categories there. So good stuff. All right, so your book is titled After Hours, and this is based on one of his movies called After Hours. All right, so before we go any further, can you give a description of the movie for those who may not have seen it?
Absolutely. And it's not that I'm surprised how many people haven't seen it. However, what I really love is when people have seen it or then see it because I'm talking about it, they're like, whoa, what was that? So I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, and that's no pressure. It's about a guy, Paul Hackett, played by Griffin Dunn. He's sort of an office drone, maybe a very typical 80s office drone in New York. And he goes out to a diner just to read and drink coffee one night. And he meets this sort of mysterious woman who he's very drawn to. So 1980s Rosanna Arquette. And she gives him her number. And it's not clear, I would say, that she definitely wants him to call, but they have this exchange. And so he decides to go see her late at night, even though it's a work night. I don't know, I'm adding, even though it's a work night. We all go out late at night sometimes, but he goes to see her in Lower Manhattan or the Lower East Side, Soho specifically, and things go terribly awry. And he can't quite get out of the neighborhood and get home. So it becomes this journey, this all-night journey where he's trying to get out of Soho and get home. And what's interesting is, Soho is very hip now and gentrified and a place, people long to be there. But back then it was really an artist scene and it was a little grimier. It's definitely the New York I grew up visiting and even living in. And so there's always a sense of dread and impending violence. And the characters in the movie, who are played by an array of amazing actors and actresses from that era, they're all like a little scary or want something. And so there's this whole sense of dread building the whole time. And so it's about a guy trying to escape. We can run with that for hours, but that's what always draws me back to it, that particular theme. How does anyone get out of anything?
Awesome. And I can't wait to watch the movie. To answer your question, and yeah, you just put pressure on me, but
I know, I apologize. That was not intentional.
All is good. It is on my agenda now to watch, because I've seen a lot of Scorsese movies, and I've almost watched After Hours a couple different times, and I never have, but now I will make sure that it happens.
And let me say, this is the one people miss. I mean, it's an all-time favorite. It's not even my favorite. And there's a great story, I think, behind why one of the reasons people miss it. But what's wonderful is people tend to stumble on it, like, unless you're maybe a friend of mine, they stumble on it late at night because it's playing on TV, and then they're mesmerized. It is very Scorsese, but it's also very much not like anything you'd associate with his last 15 or 20 years of work. So it's got its own vibe for sure, and it's definitely got the kind of vibe I get sucked into.
Gotcha. Well, I'm looking forward to watching it, especially after having read your book and your references and so forth. And I can't wait to find out who Paul Hackett is. So good stuff. All right. In After Hours, your book, you're addressing the passing of your father. Could you share the connection that you and your father shared with the cinema?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking that. So my parents, and you mentioned my mom before we started recording, they're a pair. They're not necessarily a pair in this book, but they deserve equal billing in a way. They were massive film lovers, cineasts, I think is a word people use. My dad would have, or cinephiles, which always sounds a little off to me, but they were always trying to go to the movies. And, we grew up in a town in central or upstate New York, not that big, not that small. We got movies, but we didn't get the movies they wanted to see, right? They wanted to see the latest Kurosawa movie, latest, Bergman movie. And so they would just leave town for the day or for the weekend to go see movies in bigger cities. They were both from New York City, so they had a certain level of, if we need to go to New York for the day to see this new Japanese movie that's not going to play anywhere, or we need to drive to Canada, we'll just go do that. So they were always in that mode. They were always talking about movies. And then my brother and I went to movies with them nonstop. So we grew up in a house that was saturated in art in general. My father was an artist, but they loved movies. So movies, I've always said, one way you can measure or map our family, where we were at a certain time, what we were doing. If you need to remember, when were we in Florida? Oh yeah, that's when we saw broadcast news. So it's a way to map our family's narrative together. So I associate a lot of things with my parents. They're activists, they're Jews, they're from New York City. But man, movies is there's a word I'm looking for, but it's a currency. It really is a kind of currency and a way to understand how we grew up and what we were interested in. So I was invited to pitch this project. I was thrilled. I did not have an idea because I'd never thought about writing about a movie. But as soon as I thought about it, I thought After Hours is the only choice. And it will be a book both about grief and, I immediately knew what I was going to do, at least thematically. I was going to write about grief, because even though it isn't even my dad's favorite Scorsese movie. Scorsese, we'll come back to this, I know. Scorsese was everything to my parents. And so I thought, it's going to be After Hours. We're going to write about grief. I'm going to write about creativity and feeling trapped in the midst of all that. Like I could just see it. So it was the only choice. And we're movies in my house. You know, it was very easy. And I'm still all about movies, as are my children. We've passed it on.
That's cool. That is cool. I had a similar connection with my father, but over movies. I mean, we could go see any type of movie, and I was amazed how, unlike, although he would not drive miles to go see a movie, we're going to whatever the closest theater is, and what he's seen that's drawn his attention. But we had that connection, and I can even tell you about the last movie we saw together, which is kind of cool. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But what a cool connection to be able to have those conversations, and the mapping that you're talking about, to remember where you were at the time is so awesome. Just a neat way of just remembrances that are there that can come about because of those connections. So you mentioned a little connection here with Scorsese, and that's where I want to go next. So why Scorsese? What is it about his movies that kind of...
I think there are two levels to this, and I'm sort of representing what my mom might say, who I interviewed for the book. I know we're going to come back to that as well, but she would say that for my parents, Scorsese was the first American director who seemed to be speaking the language of cinema that they experienced with foreign directors, right? So that he was the first American director to create something for them that spoke to something larger, some kind of poetry, some kind of film language. So that's part one. And that was a very big deal. So they were immediately obsessed with him like they were with other major directors. And by major, I don't even mean biggest box office gross, or just the people that you see their sort of the reverberations of their movies across countries, across time, where all of a sudden, and again, I'm not as expert as I'd like to be, but you're talking about Truffaut, or you're talking about all these directors I barely know. So there's that. But the second thing, which I find particularly visceral maybe, is that for my father, watching Scorsese movies was the first time he saw movies that reminded him of his childhood and the life he knew. So growing up a poor kid in the Bronx, being in a gang, being a high school dropout, being exposed to violence, like how people, and not just that, how people talked, how they interacted on the street, you know, criminals mixing with shopkeepers. And for him, Scorsese was telling the story he understood about his own life. So he was seeing his life reflected back onto him. And that was not his experience prior to that. So that has a lot of power. And it's funny, this is in the book. You know, my parents love Scorsese. They love De Niro. They love New York. And I remember when A Bronx Tale came out, which I like. It's not on the level of Scorsese, but that's De Niro's directorial debut. My dad was like, that is not the Bronx. Like, he was so dismissive of it, which is funny because it's based on a play by a great actor, Chaz Palminteri, who I believe, I don't know if he grew up in the Bronx, but he's another New Yorker guy. He's not that much younger than my parents, but my dad was so dismissive of A Bronx Tale. He's like, that is not what it looked like growing up in the Bronx in the 40s and 50s. Like, he just wasn't having it. And I was like, but it's De Niro. He's like, I don't care. So I'm just throwing that in because what Scorsese was able to do, I think my father felt that others hadn't done and then couldn't do nearly as well.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's what a cool thought behind that. And by the way, your father's not the only one. I've heard someone else talk about how A Bronx Tale is not it's not from that time. It's not the right time frame.
It's fascinating, right? I will give a shout out though, interestingly, because this director has become pretty major, but he's not major to everyone. He's major to me. But there's a director from Queens named James Gray. He's made a series of wonderful movies. I've been blessed to meet him and hang out with him. He's a great guy. His debut is called Little Odessa. It's a pretty obscure, independent movie about Russian crime, Russian crime bosses. I believe it's on Coney Island. And that's one of the last movies my dad saw before he died, among the handful that he insisted I see. If my mom hears this, I want her to know that she thinks she also told me to see it. So I want to make sure I give her a shout. But I think what's interesting is James Gray isn't quite Scorsese. And that's not a knock on James Gray, who I love and love all his movies. It's just that Scorsese is, I think, a singular force. But Little Odessa really spoke to my dad also. And that's a very obscure movie for a director who's made some much, much, much bigger movies in the last 10, 15 years. And so I want to add that as part of the lineage, because Little Odessa is a beautiful movie. And when I met James Gray, which is such a name drop. I apologize. I said, dude, my father and I loved Little Odessa. So I was fanboying. I said, we love Little Odessa so much. And he looked at me and he said, that's good. At least two of you have seen it. So sorry, that's a name drop, but I was beside myself. But I do consider him to be in that sort of group of New York directors for sure.
That's awesome. All right. So in your book, After Hours, you share a couple lists of favorite movies. All right.
Yes.
Let's go to that. Let's go to a list. Could you share some from the top of that list?
Yeah, absolutely. And, these aren't ranked or, they're just movies that when I think about movies, I'll do a couple of the old ones. I'll do a couple more recent ones in case people are trying to figure out what I like. Blade Runner is a given. I think Blade Runner is a masterpiece. I got to see it in Los Angeles when I was like 13 and living there for the summer, and it just blew my mind. Alien is an all-timer to me. The Warriors is a must. I think it's one of the all-time greats. Do the Right Thing is a classic to me. I think it's a true masterpiece. Hoop Dreams, which is a documentary, takes place in Chicago. The Squid and the Whale, which absolutely destroyed me. In the Bedroom, which is absolutely fantastic. Boys Don't Cry. Those are some of the throwback movies. Drugstore Cowboy, which I love. And then more recently, I just don't want to overlook these because some of them, they're all big enough that people might have seen them. But Fruitvale Station, The Florida Project, Moonlight, Minding the Gap, another documentary that snuck into the Oscar conversation, which I was thrilled about. Uncut Gems, which I think is borderline masterpiece, one of the most stressful movies I've ever seen. And the last movie I saw in a theater before the pandemic, OJ Made in America, which may be the greatest documentary ever made, period. It's incredible. And I'll just throw out one more, then I'll give you a break. Oh, two more. Shoplifters, which is an absolutely terrific film. And then Logan, which is sort of a revisiting of the Wolverine story. I think Logan is the greatest superhero movie ever made. And I go see every single one in the theater with one or both of my now grown-up children. So I've seen almost every Marvel movie made in the last 20 years. And I'm glad. Even the bad ones I'm happy to see. But Logan, I don't know, man. Logan's like a beautiful short story to me. So throwing those out, probably more movies than you wanted. I actually restrained myself a little bit.
Oh, you did good. And I loved Logan. That was something that is, first of all, a superhero who has these big metal knives on his claws, whatever you want to call them, on his hands. Yeah, he's going to do some damage. And it was a good story. I enjoyed that movie. That was
so moving. I don't know. I found it moving. Like I was, what's the word? Enwrapped. Like I could not. The first time I've seen it now again, and I rarely rewatch movies, but that one I had to rewatch with my son who had missed it the first time. I saw it by myself in a theater. I was so late at night there. My family must have been out of town. I just thought this is a perfect piece of superhero making. It just is one of the greatest superhero characters and one of the greatest movies about superheroes I've ever seen, for sure.
Oh, very much so. I think that, and it was very powerful how it comes to a close and the ending and all the things that are happening. So it was funny because I'm having emotions over this superhero movie, and I was like, wow.
Which says a lot, right?
Yeah.
Not to downplay it or overplay it, but to be that moved by the death of a fictional character who's also just gotten this fits. I think this fits with some of our other themes you and I have talked about and may still talk about, but he also just outlives the ability, he lives too long. Like he can't go any further. He became old somehow, even with all that rage, even with those metal claws, even with his incredible mutated DNA. He can't keep going. That's a pretty amazing thing to say. And that superheroes too old and too beaten up to continue. Come on. That's a gift if you love superheroes.
Very much so. Very much so. I have to go back to one that you mentioned at the beginning because Blade Runner, yes, I saw that movie, love it. But then you put in there Alien, which at the theater, I'm in there, and in those days, and I'm a little older than you are, and in those days, they checked to see if you were 17, if you were going, or above, if you were going in to see a movie, and I went with my group of friends who, it's like I think I've always looked like the age that I always looked older or something like this because they don't stop me, but they stop my friends. and none of us were 17. And what was cool was, he basically made me. He said, "You're responsible for them. Go ahead."
Wow. Well, so, that's life in the 80s also, right? Or is that still the 70s?
Yeah, that was 79. So
the first movie I snuck into underage was Risky Business, and I was so proud of myself. But with both The Warriors and Alien, since I am younger than you, I was probably only 12 or 13. So I got each of my parents to take me separately so I could see it twice, both times in the theater.
Nice.
Neither of them cared about either of those movies, but to me, they're profound. They were profound experiences. I just recently rewatched The Warriors the other night with my younger son, and he was like, "This may be one of the best movies I've ever seen." I said, "Oh my God, thank you. You can stay."
Nice. That's awesome.
You are welcome to stay in the family. Anyone who has no interest in The Warriors, I can't even talk to.
That's awesome. There's just a part of that movie that always sticks with you, which is Warriors, come out and play. Or however it's said.
The best. Right there at the climactic scene, you're like, and now this. Yeah, it's a very powerful movie. I almost geeked out the other night. I was at a book club and somebody was talking about a movie. I don't remember which one, and they were comparing it to The Odyssey. And you could see the rest of the people in the room were like, duh, The Odyssey. Like, we get that. Not that impressive. But then I thought, really, if you're going to compare a movie to The Odyssey, you got to compare it to The Warriors. But then I thought, I don't need to be the know-it-all in the room. I'm bad enough as it is, and I'm the guest writer here, so let's not be a total dork. But I thought, we're going to talk about The Odyssey. Let's talk about The Warriors. Come on. But then I looked around the room and I thought, okay, don't be so annoying.
That's awesome. So well, thank you for sharing your list. That's cool.
Absolutely, I could do that all day. It's embarrassing.
Oh yeah, some great movies there, and some. I got to tell you, I got to be honest with you, never heard of, and I think that's cool. That good. I mean, again, I'm never someone who's like, you haven't seen this, but I love throwing stuff out, and then people see it later, and they're like, oh, wow. I mean, that does make me feel good. I don't know. My attachment to movies and books is so intense that when you actually give someone something they don't know, like, again, how many people who haven't even read my book yet, and hopefully there'll be a couple more, but then they go see After Hours because I'm talking about it so much lately, and they're like, what is this thing? Nice.
I don't understand. And I'm like, I know, it's so good. There's so much dread.
That's cool. That's well, good stuff. I appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things that I have to ask here is, because of your focus on movies, would you prefer to go to the theater, or are you okay at home? And if you like the theater, do you have a favorite theater from the past or today that you like to see a film at?
So yes to everything you just said. I'm happy to see a movie at home. However, you will never, ever convince me that that's better than being in a theater. I can be in a crowded theater. I can be in a theater by myself. To me, the theater is always better. And not just because I like to get out of the house. To me, it's just such a different experience aesthetically. It's like, I enjoy a really good drink. I can make a very good gin and tonic in my kitchen and sit down at my table and read a book, and I love that. But man, throw me into some weird bar somewhere and have them pour me a gin and tonic. I mean, I just feel like the experience is heightened. And so maybe that's also being an extrovert and maybe also being very obsessive, which I am. And I'm obsessive about movies and books and bars and movie theaters. So yes, you got to be in the theater. I don't even have to be comfortable. I mean, that doesn't even matter. It doesn't have to be a nice one. And so I do have a couple, which I will share, even though, again, I'm going to sound like a complete whack job. There's a beautiful movie theater here in Chicago, the Music Box, which is an old, maybe it was always a movie theater, but it's like a throwback, like big city theater. Nice. It's very grand and the ceilings are high. So big shout out. There was also a very, 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 I'm going to use a word my mother uses, crummy theater that used to be near our house called the Village. I mean, it was a trash fire. I don't know if it was ever nice, but we used to go to that movie theater all the time, and I miss it. It's now an apartment building, and it's such a bummer. In New York City, there's a theater, the Angelica, on the Lower East Side, I believe. That's a beautiful theater, and there are so many movie theaters we used to go to when we lived there. Film Forum, and there's a great movie theater at Lincoln Center. I also want to give a shout out to my hometown. I don't know if people are going to remember this theater. It's the Ritz on Clinton Street. And I should say, not that I want to sound as obsessive as I did 5 minutes ago, but there was a time apparently in the history of America where Clinton Street in Binghamton had more bars per square inch than any street in the nation. I believe that is an accurate statistic. It also had the Ritz Theater, which was a dump. But to do a little callback, I got to see Blade Runner, the director's cut there, dragged my wife to it. And to this day, she's like, why did you take me to see that? I'm like, it was the director's cut. So I got to re-see it at the Ritz in Binghamton. And I'll also give a shout out, because we don't talk enough about this, but we had a couple of great drive-in theaters where I grew up. And I love a good drive-in. The movie experience is compromised, but the experience of just being alive and going to the movies is great. And we had one place, the V Drive-In, the Vestal Drive-In for any of my hometown folks. There's also the Airport Drive-In, which I love. And the V Drive-In, you could drive all the way around to the back and you could watch the movie for free in the field, behind the field. You just couldn't get any sound. And actually that wasn't terrible. Good for dates anyway. So those are some of the theaters I love. There's probably a lot more because I've been in a lot of movie theaters.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Because I love the theater experience. I can watch them at home, but to be sucked into a movie in the dark, and especially if you're in an audience that is there to see the movie also.
Yes.
And
sometimes, most of it, I didn't mean to cut you off. Like most
fine.
of us don't want people randomly talking in a movie. I can tune people out. I don't want that either. But sometimes you're in the right theater for the right movie. Like I remember seeing Priscilla, Queen of the Desert at this place, The Village. And there was a whole row of people in front of me who'd already seen it. And they were providing like color commentary the whole time, like you might for a football game. Wow. That could be annoying, but I'm telling you, it wasn't. It was so much fun. They were so into it. And then another time I saw the Spike Lee movie Clockers at a theater. I think I brought this up in an interview recently. And that's a very tense movie. And people were talking way too much in that movie because it was so tense. But the commentary was fascinating. It was like, don't do that. Why are you doing that? And I thought sometimes it's just the right movie at the right time. So I don't mind people losing their minds. I went to see Stop Making Sense last year, which they re-released, the Talking Heads concert film. I had never seen that. And it was at this place, the Music Box. And again, it was mostly middle-aged Gen Xers like me. But then near the end of the movie, I don't remember which song came on. This is in a huge theater. All these people started rushing the front of the room where there's like a stage area, and they started dancing during the movie.
Wow.
And I mean, it was so electrifying. It was one of the highlights of last year. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I had never seen the movie, which I was embarrassed about. The re-release was wonderful, but these people like couldn't bear it. There had to be 25, 30, 50 people maybe. They all ran up front and started dancing. I thought, this is pretty special, man.
That's awesome. That is awesome. It's when you have experiences in the theater that you, and especially if it's unexpected and the audience unexpects it with you, and something happens and it's like, like I remember from Alien in '79, one of the things that is stuck in my head is, which there's something funny about saying it's stuck in my head, but was the chest burster scene, because they had basically done an incredible job. I was a big fan of Starlog magazine and stuff like this because there's no internet then, so you couldn't release all that stuff that they do now. But they kept it from people, and including the actors. They didn't know until the whole thing ends up happening, and so you get that reaction from them. Which, I'll never forget seeing that the first time. And there's lots of other films that have had similar sorts of responses, but like in a recent one, which. I don't know if you saw some of the Star Wars newer movies that were made. I'm a really big fan of the past, read the books, the first 3 movies, even though they fall somewhere else in the numbers. But it's
understood.
But one of the coolest things was the reaction, because I had seen something on YouTube when people got to see the first preview of it. But it was still neat in the theater that was jammed, where the movie where Chewbacca and Han Solo appear, and he sticks his head out of the door, says, "Hey, we're not," whatever the line is, I forget that, we're not at home anymore or something like that. I forget what he says, or welcome home or something. And, and that the reaction from the audience was so awesome to see the two characters. And,
I think you're speaking to something, 2 things about the movie experience, which you can experience at home. Again, I discourage it actively and regularly fight with my family about this, but I think you're touching on 2 things. If you don't really know what's coming, there is the visceral charge. That that you're surprised. And there's so much joy in that. And, life has endless surprises that we don't want, right? Around health and work and a million things and people who suck. But we also want those surprises that bring us pleasure and pain. And, so there's the emotional element, which I think, yes, you can get that at home, but man, you really get in a theater. But then you're speaking to a secondary thing, which I know I was sort of alluding to. On a good day, there's also a communal experience, right? Like
Right.
you build a sense of community, at least. So when everyone yells together, everyone's like, no way. You're like, whoa, I'm in something, right? You're really, as my kids would say, it's a vibe. But that's a very particular feeling. And I'm here for it all the time. I want to get scared. I want to be surprised. I want the whole room to cover their eyes. I mean, that's to me is very exciting.
Hey, you got that right. My favorite one in most recent times was the first new Ghostbusters movie that's out of this current group that's been happening. So with the kids and with that Dan Aykroyd wrote and so forth, and it was because I love the original first Ghostbusters, and in this one, if you saw this one, what was really cool about it was I stayed away from everything online that's talking about. I watched a few trailers to see that, are they really going to do, honor the original and stuff like this. And it's like, so I didn't know that. And so no spoilers here, but there's a real cool ending to it that if you haven't seen it, it's been out long enough. What are you waiting on? But,
right.
But if you're a Ghostbusters fan, from those original days, oh my gosh, I had no clue what was coming towards the end of it. And you heard the reaction from the audience when this event happens. And it was like, oh, that's stuck in my head too. That's neat.
That's the best. I also like my older son and I go to a lot of movies together. Some of the movies where the ending, they really stick the ending, but the audience doesn't know what to do. Like they're either out of breath or they're overwhelmed.
Right.
And everyone just sits there for a moment. And they're not just watching the credits because they're watching the credits. They're actually like physically exhausted or emotionally drained. And I like that feeling too. Like, did I just run 2 hours? Like, what have I been doing for the last 2 hours that I'm so drained and I just need to sit here and let these credits wash over me? I find that experience to be really exciting also. Like, how did they do that? Why did they do that? Okay, I'm going to have to sit with it. Then we're going to have to go get a cup of coffee or a gin and tonic and talk about it because I don't even know how I feel anymore.
Nice.
That's a good feeling too.
That is a good feeling. That's one of those things that just like, boy, at the end of a movie, if you're that exhausted and you're wanting to have a conversation with somebody, why in the world did they do that?
Yes, that's the other thing which we haven't talked about. That's the part of the movie going experience that can also get lost. If you went with my parents, you would talk about it for like an hour afterward, wherever you were. And I remember one of the last movies I know I saw with my father before he died was Hurricane with Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And, there's that very famous Bob Dylan song about Hurricane. And my parents loved Bob Dylan. And my dad was pretty weak at that point, but he could still talk for hours if he had to. So we saw Hurricane, my wife and I, my mom and dad went back to their house. We sat in the living room with cups of coffee. We listened to Bob Dylan sing the song. And then we talked about the movie for, like an hour. And then, of course, in talking about it, you're thinking back to the story. It's a biopic. You're thinking about Bob Dylan. You're thinking, how did Denzel Washington get so buff for this movie? Like, there's so many things going on. How does this compare to other Denzel Washington movies? Oh, you remember that time we were in DC and we went and saw Training Day? What prompted that? Why did we go see Training Day? Well, that's a B-level movie. Yeah, but man, who makes better B-level movies than Denzel Washington, right? And then he still won an Oscar. And then, oh wait, but Glory, remember Glory? Oh yeah, we saw that summer in Albany, New York when you were in college and we came up for dinner, but we still snuck in a movie. And then that's what we all did, right? And so it becomes a whole thing. And so it's always funny to me when people don't want to talk about the movie because that's also not my childhood experience. Like, again, I'm the product of an artist and a therapist, so we talk a lot.
Nice. I would have talked with you if I've been with people who are like, why are you talking to me about the movie? I just saw the movie.
I will come to Georgia. We'll see a movie. We'll do this properly. I don't want to leave you hanging.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So something that you talk about in your book is the use of journals. And throughout your book, you're talking about writing with journals and then not using journals. And, could you talk about writing and journals? Because I love the use of journals. All right. And when you start talking about this, I'm like, this is cool. All right. And then you talked about where you're wondering if it would change if you didn't. So you got to talk about that.
Right. So one thing that's coming up, I feel even more in this call than the last time you were nice enough to have me on your show, is that a book like this speaks to a lot of my obsessive, thinking, a lot of my obsessive behavior, my need for some level of regimentation, which I know you can appreciate as a guy who knows military. So I'm not, but there is a desire for me to do things, have a sort of ongoing practice. But in my 20s, particularly really almost 20 to 30, I was obsessed with becoming a writer. Like I had just decided I had to become a writer. I could not. It got in my head. And by the way, as far as I can tell in terms of origin story, it's because I wrote a couple of creative writing pieces when I was a senior in high school, and I got attention for them and validation, and maybe I wasn't getting it anywhere else. So I'm doing a little dime store psychology there, but it got in my head that was something I ought to be doing. And I went out to California after graduation, and I didn't write. I did everything else. And so at some point I thought, bro, you got to start slowing it all down. Like I was always out. We were always running around. We all worked a lot. We all ran around a lot. San Francisco in the early 90s was like one of the best places in the universe. It was pre-.com. No offense to our .com brothers and sisters, but it was a great place. And so I went to tons of movies, of course. But I'm sharing all that because at one point I thought, you need to slow down. Like, what's next, right? You're not just going to run around for the next 10 years, though I'm good at that, by the way. And so I thought you should journal. Like, I don't know how that started. So primarily throughout my 20s, I primarily just journaled about when am I going to start writing? And then does this qualify as writing? And I didn't think it did. It qualified as something, but it was a very obsessive, in good way, wonderful behavior. All through the rest of my time in California, then through my 2 years in New York City. Then when we moved to Chicago, I just kept journaling every day. And there was a sort of, there's a better word, I can be kinder, but there was a sort of pathetic element to it. Like, so now you're not writing. When are you going to start? So there's that chunk. And then I started writing, and then I kept journaling. And then at some point the journaling tailed off, and then I forgot about it for 20 years. So there's that element. Then during the height of the pandemic, now, I'm a writer, I write every day, I've published whatever. I introduce journaling as a daily exercise to a summer class I teach, which isn't even a writing class, it's a career development class. But I insist that the students journal every morning to start class, to get centered. And I give them prompts that are sort of personal narrative or career driven. And then after the semester, maybe this was 3 Mays ago or 4 now, one of the young women writes me a note and says, are we allowed to keep journaling after class is over? Which I was fascinated by. And I wrote back and I said, of course. And then she said, do we have to use prompts? I don't think I need a prompt. I just sort of want to get going. And I was like, just go. Like, absolutely. Rah, rah. Like I was being a total cheerleader. But I was also amazed, that she thought she needed permission. Like, it was unclear to me what was going on there. But afterward, I thought, why aren't you journaling? Like, all of a sudden, it sort of hit me like a lightning bolt. Like, dude, you need to get centered. This is a pandemic. Like, you're holding on like everybody else, or maybe more or less. Who knows? So then I just started journaling daily. So now it's become a new thing where now for me, it's very much about just getting centered in the morning, sometimes at night. And it's super boring. Like, it's kind of funny. You're always like, oh my God, are people going to read my journals? Nobody would want to read these journals. I mean, they're about work and getting things done and being obsessed, but it's become part of my daily ritual. And now I see it as sort of a calming exercise. I don't think there's anything creative to it. So it's a practice. I treat it as a practice. I find it calming. I think it brings me a level of equanimity, which I'm always striving for, but it is also balanced in terms of this book, in that one of the things I wanted to channel when I wrote the book was the book, The Basketball Diaries, which is my favorite all-time book, which is by Jim Carroll, where he took his journals and turned it into this nonfiction book. And so I had this fantasy that I would write the whole first draft of After Hours in real time. I would just sit down every day, it didn't matter when, and I would write the whole book journal entry style and go with wherever my brain was that day. And I did that, and then I tightened it later. So the book is intended to have like a journal entry. It's supposed to feel live wire. And I'm going to add one more wrinkle, then I'll leave you alone on this. Some of the writers who've really influenced me are writers who've used their journals to write. So Wendy C. Ortiz, is a memoirist or a dreamwarist out on the West Coast. I mean, we're friends now, but like I'm obsessed with her writing. She goes back to her journals to write her books. And then Mike DeCapite is an East Coast New York writer, and he wrote this beautiful book, Jacket Weather, and he used his journal entries to help frame it. And so I really had journal on the brain. And I kept thinking, I want this book to feel like a journal, but then I'm going to be meta, though I definitely didn't use that word because that sounds terrible out loud. I'm actually going to look back at my old journal entries because as it turned out, I was journaling about after hours 30 years ago. It's in there. And I was journaling about wanting to be a writer. And with this book being a desire to tap into what does grief feel like, but also how does one become creative, there were those journal entries waiting for me where all I was talking about was why aren't I more creative? And also, let's talk about after hours. Like I kept writing about it even then because, the character's trapped. And I think I want to do a callback to your earlier question. One of my obsessions with the movie is why does this guy feel so trapped? Why do any of us feel trapped? And when we feel trapped, how do we get out of it, right? How do we get out of feeling trapped? And so all of a sudden the journal, your question's wonderful because not only have I way overthought this answer, but I was very consciously thinking about what journals mean the whole time I was working on the book.
That's awesome. That's and it's cool what you're talking about because I've run into authors who use journals like you're talking about. I interviewed somebody recently who had been an officer in Vietnam, and he kept journals, and he's now creating a book series based on those journals. And
That's amazing.
Run into a gentleman who worked for National Geographic, and he still does in recent times. And 30 years of journals, he's using those. He used those to make this big coffee table book, and I think it's cool that you use the journal writing process for that. And I think it's so impactful. In sticking to the same sort of kind of format talk here for a second, something else that you share in After Hours is about sometimes taking a break from writing and then starting again and wondering, what does that do to you? Which I thought was cool. I read that section a couple of times because I think that was pretty impactful. Could you share a little bit about it? What you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for drawing attention to that. I wrote my first sentence like as a writer, as intending to be a writer, probably at age 30. So I really did spend all of my 20s, and then I got going, and now I've been going, all these years, 25 plus years since then. There's a couple of elements to your question. The first being, it always felt to me like I got a late start. It'd be easy for me, the way I am, to feel kind of embarrassed about that. I don't anymore. But I'm conscious that time is limited on some level. Hopefully not that limited, but we can talk about that. My dad died at 59, so I'm creeping up on that. So I am conscious that I want to keep creating, that once I got started, my brain has not been drained of ideas. And so to miss a day, and no one cares, right? Like this is important. No one's like, oh my God, when's the next Ben Tanzer book coming out? Or my agent isn't screaming at me on the phone. You promised, very few people are on my back. It's all personal. But there isn't only so much time, and I only give myself so much time every day. I rarely write more than 30 minutes. And so to skip a day is to lose an opportunity, and that I don't want. Not an opportunity to get published, not an opportunity to somehow write a National Book of the Year or, winning book. That's probably not going to happen. But how can I not find 30 minutes every day to keep this project going, which is now as important to me as almost anything else? So there's that element, right? So what I've tried to practice, though, is just having more grace. When you miss a day, you pick it back up. But that's a dance. And 10 years ago, that kind of thing would kill me. But in the same way, it would kill me that my book didn't break out. Now I'm more zen or whatever. I'm not that zen, but I would love to be. But I'm trying to practice it. So that's part of that. But there's another part, which is, being so obsessive. And I know I've said that a couple of times. Sometimes making myself take a break because everything I see feels like the next story, the next essay, the next book, and that doesn't seem very healthy. And so there are occasions where I do take a break. I go against my inclinations not to, just to sort of honestly calm down. The other thing I'll add to this, because there's a lot, like apparently a lot of my answers today for you, I have a lot of thoughts in a lot of directions, but the other thing about a break is I tend to work on several things at once. And so I rarely feel like I need a break from writing. I try not to beat myself up when I miss a day. However, if I finish a draft of something, I have sort of trained myself to put it aside and work on something else to give my brain some space to forget about it and then come back to it. So I do use breaks strategically as well. And I'll just pull up something I was working on 6 months ago, a year ago. Like, again, I don't have a series of contracted books where people are like, when's the next novel coming? It's 18 months. So for me, the goal is to keep trying to write the best things I can and then either submit them, or when someone reaches out, which happens, and they say, what are you working on? I can say, well, actually, I'm working on this and this and this. Do you have any interest in any of that? Because then that will become a priority. So I guess I see breaks in three ways. There's the strategic break, there's the mental health break, but there is also the you don't get a break. And so then I have to balance that. I don't know if that's what you were leaning into, but I wanted to put that in the book too, because again, I'm also trying to understand my own process and my own mental game around writing and getting started. And I know that I can be very cruel to myself when I miss a moment or skip something. And so I'm trying to understand how that works. And then in writing a book that's got a journal vibe, it's also simultaneously helping me get more centered. Okay, you missed a day. Now back at it, right? Like, okay, pick it back up. Nothing happened.
I love that, because and to answer your question, I mean, yes, this is exactly where I was hoping we would go with this, because it shows you thinking about, is this going to be bad? Because I really feel like taking a break. I mean, you're having those thoughts and talking about it and sharing it with the reader. And I think that's so powerful, because you really kind of let the reader know it's okay to have these thoughts too. All right.
Well, I'm glad you said it like that. Hey, I appreciate it. But I wanted this book to be very overtly conscious. Like, here's what's going on in my head today. We saw this movie, which I loved, Past Lives, about this ambitious writer, but also her sort of unrequited love over many generations for someone she'd gone to school with. And my wife and I and my older son, Miles, saw it, and we loved it. And I really loved it. And then the next day I was going to work on this book. I didn't know what I was going to write about yet. And then I dropped Miles off. He had to take an exam for his student teaching certificate, and he was taking it months before he needed to. And some of that was his own obsessive nature, like, let's get this out of the way so it's out of my head. But I also saw it as a kind of ambition, like he knows what he wants to do. And then I thought, here's this movie about ambition. Here's my son taking this exam. Here's me sitting in a coffee shop waiting for him working on a book. What does it say about my ambition? Because when I was younger, I was embarrassed to feel ambitious. Like somehow that was a weakness. And now in middle age and now wanting things and understanding, you have to get lucky and put in the work and all this stuff. That is something I wish I'd been more ambitious at a younger age. It's okay to have started writing later, but man, but then also what's my relationship to it? So all of that, I thought, put it on the page. I mean, let's see how that shakes out. This book doesn't exist without ambition. And the people, at least in that scene, my son, this movie, myself, ambition's driving something. And I'm fascinated by that. So let's share it. And if someone doesn't like it, awesome, tell me, please, because I'd be really fascinated by that.
Well, I got to tell you, I don't see how they couldn't like it, because it's just you sharing your thoughts and it's kind of flowing right there. I mean, that's what happens throughout your book, and I love that. Throughout your book, you share the content of discussions between you and others, and this is a cool switch in voices. Could you share why you chose who you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So I immediately had a vision for what this was going to be thematically, but I also immediately had a vision for what it might be structurally. And I had read a book I really liked. The title may be escaping me. The author is Ashley Marie Farmer, and she wrote a memoir. I think it's called Dear Damn. So Ashley, if you're listening and I got the title wrong, I'm so sorry, because I love that book. But she had interviewed key people in the book along the way. And I was so fascinated by that, because I love interviewing people, right? I have a podcast. You've been on the podcast. It's a great episode. But I also do a lot of work, stuff to pay the bills that involves interviewing people. So whether I'm good at it or not, I enjoy it, right? And so I thought, if this is a book where we're trying to get everything on the page, why not interview people who had a key influence on me or the book, as perceived in my own head? So I reached out to my mom and my younger brother and asked if I could interview them, because I wanted them to offer insight into our family, into the movies, into my father. I reached out to these two authors I just mentioned to you, Wendy C. Ortiz and Mike DeCapiti, who I'm both friends with. And I always feel like I'm pronouncing Mike's name wrong. Mike, I'm sorry. But, they to me were journal-oriented authors. I mean, Wendy, her her books just have really affected me emotionally and otherwise. So to me, she's a goddess. And so I just thought even just talking to her makes me happy because it fills me with inspiration, but they both really influenced the books. I talked to them. I talked to my friend Adam Lawrence, who I've been friends with since second grade. And, he was important to me because he's important to me, but he was important because even though per se After Hours has nothing to do with our relationship, he turned me on to so many cultural things that are important to me that he feels like he's part of my creative development. He introduced me to the Ramones. He introduced me to the Basketball Diaries, which again, the most profound piece of art I've ever experienced, except for maybe the Michael. Is that what it's called in Florence? Michael doesn't sound right. No. What is it? The David. Sorry. Wow.
There
David.
you go. There you go.
When I saw the David, I was like, what is this thing? Anyway, Adam introduced me that. Adam introduced me to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like he got us tickets to see Bruce Springsteen when we were teenagers and we took the bus. So and then we shared comic books. And there's another friend of mine, if he listens, Eric Boehm. He's also in that universe, but these are people who impacted, I think, who I am as much as anybody and as much as artistically. So I want to talk to him. There's also a documentary filmmaker, Yogi Roth, who is a friend who I'm low-key obsessed with, partially the way he lives. And, I had interviewed him for Men's Health about a documentary he made, his debut. And that documentary was about his father, who was seemingly dying and didn't die, thank goodness. So spoiler alert. But I was asked to interview him. And when I met him, I was just taken with him. This is a guy that makes movies, the way he goes about his day, and he's very regimented. And at the time, I thought, how can't someone just be creative all the time? Like I was really struggling with this. This is about 10 years ago. And had I made mistakes? Was I too much of an office drone? Like all the stuff about After Hours was in my head at the time. And then I met him and I thought, oh, you can be all these things at once. Like he really had an impact on me. I thought, because I went to see him and I wanted to hang out with him in LA and I wanted him to take me surfing. And he said, look I'll take you surfing. We're going to go running first and you're going to get to my house by 7:30. And I was on a personal trip and I was like, 7:30? And he was like, dude, I have to be at work by 10. I don't work until 10. You can have all my time before 10 o'clock. We're going to go running. We're going to go surfing. Wow. We're going to go buy breakfast burritos at the Venice Beach farmer's market. And he goes, but then I'm off to work, man. And I remember the way he handled it. I thought, oh, that's what I'd been doing wrong. I had thought it had to be all or nothing. And he was like, it can be all of everything. Just, get organized. Anyway, it had a big deal. So I wanted to interview him. But then when I went to interview him, it turned out his new movie was coming out. About a trip he took around Cape Horn, I believe. And in that book, he followed the journals that his great-great-grandfather wrote when he went on the same journey. So I kept thinking, there's Yogi again, there's another movie, and there's another journal, right? Like it's all and I'm not that spiritual. I thought it's all connected. So I'm going to interview this guy. And it was funny because I reached out for the interview. He was like, hey, are you going to be in LA this weekend? I was like, no. I mean, what am I going to be doing in LA? That sounded great. He goes, because my new movie's coming out. And that was that movie. He's like, it would be cool if you could come to the premiere. He goes, but it'll be on Amazon this weekend. So that weekend, I made everybody watch it, my family. And it was on Father's Day. So to me, it's just all this stuff piling up. So I don't even know if that's the answer you're looking for, but I asked all those people to talk to me. And then I transcribed those interviews and I put them in transcribed, but almost word for word.
That's so cool. That is really neat what you're sharing there, because it really makes you think about people as a reader. Your words and talking with these people start making you think about, at least with me as a reader, people who've had those impacts on me, something like that. And, when it's funny because there are a lot of music groups from the same time frame that I think we have in common. And one of them is the Ramones. And what was funny was, in those days, I really didn't know anything about them except I liked their music. And I thought they were brothers.
Right, of course.
and then my world was shattered. But
I know, that is upsetting. I was there once. I get it.
But the point is that it's so powerful, that section of your book, the different conversations. And one of them you got to make sure that you say something about is that you do talk with your mom. And
yes, that was wonderful. I mean, we talk a lot, and I just wanted to know, with parents, right? This is not profound, by the way, but we have so many ideas about them and we project so much onto them. And, it's funny, I don't know who I was talking to, but I think I was talking about The Missing in this. I was invited to a book club the other night. So thank God The Missing isn't gone yet. But someone said something along the lines of, oh, and then there's that day where you realize your parents are human and how profound that is. And I remember thinking, I never had that experience. Like my parents always seemed very human to me. I mean, very cool, but they weren't much for boundaries. And that sounds more negative than I mean it. It's just like they were what they are. They're, wonderful people, good parents. I mean, there were other challenges growing up, but they never needed to become more human to me. I mean, I think if anything, I needed to say to them, I need you to treat me less like a fellow. One time I said to my mom, I need you to treat me less like a fellow adult and more like your kid because I'm having a very hard time and this conversation's too intense for me. But they're very interesting. They're well-rounded humans. And so, but again, I still have all these projections onto them. What happened when? What does it mean? And I know all the stuff about the movies and how important that was, but do I really know why it was important to my mom? So yeah, that was a great conversation. And actually, sneak preview, I'm going to interview my brother and my mom about the book, about their interviews for my podcast to help promote the book. So the three of us, we did a practice run the other day, but something happened and it didn't record like I wanted it to. So that's going to come out too. And, they're interesting people. And that's the other thing, right? They're interesting people who care about movies and care about everything. I don't know. Again, I keep thinking, is this what Steven's interested in? But I was really, I mean, it's not a challenge. I'm sure there are people who reach out to their parents and they're like, I can't give you an hour. I don't have an hour's worth of conversation. My family's the opposite. It's like, tell me what you want to talk about. But I mean, there are mornings where I'll just go visit my mom for the weekend and we'll sit down with a cup of coffee and I'll look up and 2 or 3 hours are gone, which sounds like a flex. And I really apologize to everybody out there whose moms don't want to hang out and talk for hours because I know a lot of people want that. So I'm not making light of it, but it is an element in our relationship,
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. And it's just, and, to answer your question again, oh yeah, this is excellent what you're sharing. And
good.
So good stuff.
It's so much different to talk about now. I suppose, and it's great because you're the first person I really talked to out loud. I suppose, even though I don't feel self-conscious about the book at all, and I'm happy to share, and if it gives people insight, I'm thrilled. I'm probably self-conscious about talking about why I made the decisions that I made because it's much different talking about fiction. With nonfiction, I'm thinking, why did I do that? Did that work? So again, you're probably seeing some of that and I appreciate you being so kind about it.
Oh, it works. All right. It's good. I like it. I like it. I like what you're talking about and how you're talking about it. All right. So we're getting close to finishing up. And one of the things I got to make sure I ask you, this is around page 111 or so. So in this area of your book, you say this, all of which speaks about how we become artists and creatives. Immersion in grief is a medium for discovery and at times a path forward. All right. So you gotta, I saved this for my real, as we were at the end. Tell us about
nothing
this.
Like having your own writing quoted back at you. That's a nice ego boost and a sense of, wow, what did I mean when I said that? No. I think one thing that's come up in the course of this conversation and certainly in thinking about the book is that you've got this protagonist who feels stuck. And so one of my ongoing journeys, one of my ongoing obsessions, I'll use that word for the last time, is how do we become stuck and how do we become unstuck? And so as I saw the question in advance, I thought grief is one of the ways we can become stuck, right? That we're so lost in our pain. We're so lost in the confusion. Why did this happen? Whatever the dynamic is, that, you can lose your sense of self and you can lose your velocity. I don't know where that word just came from, but I like it. You can lose some velocity. And so I think when I wrote that, what I was thinking was with most things that are painful, we have to lean into them, not lean away, right? One of the ways we become stuck is that we flinch or we don't let it wash over us. We let it saturate us. And so I'm very much have spent the last number of years, whatever the time frame is, trying to focus more on letting things wash over me and feeling all the pain, but also feeling all the excitement, but also feeling all the disappointment, like whatever it is, sitting with it and then leaning into it. And so as a creative, one of the benefits, and now I'm going to sound ice cold, is that to lean into something like that is to also give you some material and give you things to think about, right? So I have an outlet. I get to lean into it. And then someone says, do you want to write a book about a movie? What would you write about? And I think after hours immediately, and I think, why? And I think, oh yeah, because my dad loved that movie. Oh yeah, it's a Scorsese movie. Oh yeah, it's about a guy being stuck. And so when I wrote that, I thought, we lean in and we sit with it. That's how we try to take care of ourselves. But then also as artists, you see a path like, maybe I could also write about this. And I want to say, here I'm being self-conscious again, Stephen, apologies. It's not that I feel like I have some vision to offer people. Like I'm reading a book now by a friend of mine, and it's a book about healing. And like, she really has some advice to give. Like she's trained. I am not. I don't know if I'm giving anyone anything helpful in this book. And I'm not saying that to be self-deprecating either, right? It's not that kind of book, but I am saying this is what I did. And this is how I've been dealing with it. And these are the movies I went to because we go to movies. And I did a list in there of the 10 movies I saw right after my dad died, but also the 10 movies I saw while he was dying, because even while he was dying, we were still going to movies and they mean something, right? And then they're tied into something. The night my mom and I went to see the original Kings of Comedy, another Spike Lee movie that's a live movie with a bunch of comics. And then I went to visit my dad in the hospital on the way home, and he was having a very rough night. And there was the guilt of going to the movie first and not going to see him earlier. But there was also the sense of that movie, saved my life a little bit tonight. I laughed a lot, and there's a lot of pain right now. I didn't write about that in the book because sadly, you can't write about everything. I would. But again, I think that's what I meant with that. How do we deal with our grief? How do we become unstuck? And then if you're lucky enough to be in my position, you might have a chance to write about it also. And that's a gift. And I do think writing is a gift. I don't, not just the ability, the act of it day to day, which is absolutely a gift and probably saves me all the time, but even being born with the ability to have a brain like this. I mean, it could be something else. That's the other thing. It doesn't have to be writing. It could be crochet or documentary filmmaking or gardening. Like, it's just good to have a thing. And I'm sure someone who has a thing that isn't writing could write a very similar sentence and mean it, That's all. So that's what I was trying to get at there.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. It just really spoke to me as I came across that part, and I'm like, I got to come back to this. And thank you for sharing. All right. As we close, Ben, if someone wanted to follow up and connect with you or learn more, where would you send them?
I guess the best place to start is tanzerben.com, my website, the mothership. You can see what's going on. You can see what I'm blogging about and posting about and what the contact information is. It'll also take you to the other social media, which I can also be a little, I'm trying not to use the word obsessed again, but I am active on social media also. So it will take you to those places. Twitter, I just can't bear to say X, Facebook, TikTok, like Instagram. I like to experiment with all of those. And, it's interesting because I'm a very early adopter of all that. And in my head, I always thought they would serve the tool of communications and marketing. I never saw it as, oh, Facebook, we're going to talk to all of our high school friends. So that's been great. And I've reconnected with a lot of people, but I was always more ice cold about it. I always thought these are platforms that people like me, author, podcaster, whatever, book promotion person, this is a tool. It always seemed like a tool to me. And I remember early on with Facebook, a couple of my high school friends wrote me, or maybe friends here in Chicago, and they're like, you're on Facebook? What's wrong with you? That's for children. I said, I know, and I'm no visionary, but I said, I'm telling you, we are going to move books and other things. It's going to serve. I was convinced. I actually made my office adopt all those tools too at the time when they didn't want to. So again, I'm no trailblazer, but I just thought they are underappreciating the power of this whole word of mouth, get out there, do this thing. So you can find me almost everywhere because I like to be everywhere. Very cool. And I'll put those links in my show notes as well as to your website, making sure that they can find your book After Hours and a link to your podcast, which is really awesome. This podcast will save your life. That's Change your life.
Change your life. There we go.
I do not want to take any responsibility for saving your life. However, if I can change it, as one of my author friends, Nick Ostick, once said, dude, even if you change someone's life for 5 minutes, you've done them a proper. So I keep the bar pretty low, but I'm fairly convinced I can probably change your life for at least 5 minutes if you listen. You are welcome to. And there are 300 plus episodes. I'm not in Mileto area for sure. I'm not on your level for sure. On the other hand, you are one of my guests, and I'm thrilled you're in the mix.
Well, thank you. It's an awesome podcast. I'm a subscriber. Love it. Enjoy listening. And I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. So I got one last question for you, Ben.
Sure.
And it goes like this. You talked about being on these other platforms. And one of the really cool ones is if listeners connect with you on Instagram, from time to time, you post pics of neon signs, other signs, artwork, stuff on the side of walls and things you see while you're out running or, near where you live in Chicago. These images are typically in black and white. Could you talk about what makes you want to share those images? Because they're really cool.
No, thank you. I mean, some of it, I'm sure, is my very sad artistic aspirations. Like, man, could I actually get a good photo of that? So part of it just the desire to be in that medium, and then to have an opportunity to do that, share that. Obviously, I'm not a real photographer, in a way that isn't weird to people. I mean, that's part of it, right? You all of a sudden are given this opportunity to share things that you are attracted to. Again, I'm not trying not to use the word obsessed. Like, I love neon signs, and I've been completely enamored, again, trying to avoid that word, with street art and graffiti and public mural. I mean, since I was a kid. I mean, we used to spend so much time in New York City, and New York City in the 70s was so dirty and filled with graffiti. And I love dirty things and filled with graffiti and noise. So always. And then Keith Haring came along, and Basquiat. And I just thought, okay, I just want to capture all this somehow. So that's the bigger part of it. And then you have something like Instagram, and it's a little less embarrassing, right? So in my middle age, I'm less embarrassed by everything. But when I was younger, I was more embarrassed by being such a fanboy for so many things. Social media actually is a great medium for someone like me, because you're like, oh, lots of people are doing this. Like, you don't seem as weird. The second part, years ago, I saw this interview with Kevin Hart, and they asked him a similar question, like, why are you posting all this stuff all the time? And he said, people are interested in who I am. They only know me on stage or on TV. Obviously, I'm not operating in Kevin Hart's universe. So I'm going to show them what I'm seeing during the day, and maybe that'll give them a sense of who I am. And so that's what I thought. I'm not going to post a million shots of my children. I'm not going to post things where, like, I'm in the hospital, though I guess if I was having some weird surgery, I might share a photo. But you can have a sense, if you go on my Instagram feed, what I care about and who I am. And so I also want it to be like a level of authenticity without being too weird. So I am going to run. I am going to look for graffiti. I travel a lot for work. So then if you're really paying attention, you'll be like, oh, wait, that's graffiti, but it's not Chicago. That's Nashville, or that's San Francisco, or that's somewhere in Montana, right? So I'm also traveling quite a bit. So I don't think anyone cares. My kids find it so embarrassing. But it's just a way of saying, if you care what Ben Tanzer's up to, he's giving you enough of a sense of it during the day. This is the movies he might have gone to. These are the images he saw. This is what moved him today.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. And it really comes through. And I love those pictures in black and white like that, because it really makes them.
I do have a black and white thing, which my younger son hates, but I find it very rich. There's something about black and white, the aesthetic of it. I know there's a better word, but I just find it, rich is the only word I can think of, but there is something about making something black and white that always makes me smile.
That's cool. Well, it has that great movie feeling too, because it's
maybe that's it.
Because part of it, like the mist or something that you have, and like I don't know if that's early morning or late at night when you're running, but it's like some of those images that you found. I'm almost waiting for it to be the next, the trailer for something. So
that would be great. And it's also true that I run a lot of the time very early in the morning, because I'm on some gig, and it's like you'll be flying home in 6 hours, and if you don't run now, you're not running. And a lot of times I'll be rolling off a plane, and I'll think, if you don't run tonight, when are you going to run? And so all of a sudden you're like, I'm in the middle of Nashville and I'm running, and so that's the other thing. I get all these moments where the sun is cool, or it's snowing, or I'm in the rain, and you're like, oh man, is it possible to capture that? That's the other thing, the challenge of trying to capture like what's in your head
That's cool.
on screen. Kind of like with writing, I know what's in my head. Can I get it on paper, man?
Love it. I love it. Ben, thank you so much for sharing your book, After Hours, Scorsese, Grief, and the Grammar of Cinema. It's so moving. Connects the reader to you, your father, and your thoughts about Scorsese's movies. If a reader has ever lost a parent, reading Ben's After Hours will definitely ensure that you drift to your own thoughts about loss. Your writing is thought-provoking, and I wish you the best in all you do.
Oh, thank you so much for this. Thank you for the support. I mean, people like me, meaning just authors who are operating in a universe where there isn't a whole team behind us, or we're actually not that famous, or whatever the dynamic is. I mean, we really count on folks in your seat, but we also really appreciate you. You give us a chance to talk about something we love, and something we're hoping other people will find. And, the books may not find people otherwise. So please know how important it is what you do. I know you enjoy it, which is very cool, but in my seat, we really benefit from it. And someone's interested in what we have to say, which is very cool. So I really appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, and appreciate what you do. It's good stuff. Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.